Okay, Paula.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, but we're having a special right now on global warming. And in order to sort of get my viewers up to speed here, I became interested in global warming when Webster Tarpley was talking about it vis-a-vis his work on international terrorism. He said this is something very important to understand, and that global warming was a fraud. Now, I was very, I thought, well, okay, because I read his book on international terrorism, but I didn't understand how global warming being a fraud tied in. So I wanted to understand the science. I just wanted to know. And since Webster's expertise is not on weather, and he's very busy doing other things, he wasn't the one to ask. So I sort of sent up a prayer that I wanted somebody that could explain to me, a non-scientist, what was really going on. And I found out about the Internet Skeptic on the internet, perhaps through my YouTube postings, and I found out that he was in Ohio. And I was heading out to Dayton, Ohio, to be with my friend when she goes for the board meetings for the Patterson Homestead, and that's the home of National Cash Register. So I said, why don't we meet in Dayton, Ohio? And he came to Dayton, I came with the camera, and I videotaped his presentation. The presentation was very enlightening. I learned a lot. There was more. I wanted to watch it again and again to learn more. But after the presentation, he sat with John Cheshire, who's doing a lot of work on free energy. And free energy, a lot of times people are wondering, and then there's whispers that Nikola Tesla had the ability to give us more power and energy than we were actually able to get through those vested interests that are trying to control things. And Webster always talks about the oligarchy. And the oligarchy is something that operates behind the scenes. So when I actually learned the science about global warming and what was really going on, I thought it was just fabulous, and it would be something that New Yorkers should be aware of. So what was so interesting to me is that the Internet Skeptic doesn't come from this background that I've just described to you. He was just studying the science. And the conclusions, though, are something that is of great concern to us. There's something called Holocaust denial. And are you two okay?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay, there's some little infield chatter here. I need to give a big introduction because my viewers are used to seeing me in a certain way. So Holocaust denial is something that I've dealt with a little bit, and it's something I want to learn more about. But it was something brought up at the 9/11 Truth Conferences. Now, I've also heard of 9/11 denial. Now, I knew for certain that the groups that I was visiting here and there in New York were not denying that 9/11 happened. Now, the problem with global warming and restricting, making certain really draconian measures to stop things that maybe don't need to be stopped, means that it's going to cause huge hardship. And whenever you get into the area of huge hardship, you get into an area that is going to necessitate population control. And this is something that I think, instead of being concerned about Holocaust denial, let's be concerned about how did the Holocaust come about. And it isn't something that just all of a sudden people wanted to pick up and get rid of certain people. It was something that came about gradually. And I'd like to call to your attention out of this tome that I often use, which is George Bush's unauthorized biography by Tarpley that was put out, and it's available on the internet since 1992. The most important American political event in those preparations for Hitler was the infamous Third International Congress on Eugenics, held at New York's American Museum of Natural History, August 21st to August 23rd, 1932, supervised by the International Federation of Eugenics Societies. Now, the final conclusion last night when the Internet Skeptic gave a presentation here in New York was he was very concerned that we're very clear about what's going on in the world and in the climate, So that just like you want to take a patient and give him the right medicine, you need to diagnose correctly. If you don't diagnose correctly, if you don't know what the factors are, you can't heal the disease. And right now, the disease I feel that we're faced with is a disease of disconnecting the planet so that the people are not working together. And these topics are weighty and they're vast. I'm always encouraging public access producers, before they interview somebody, to read the person's book, to be aware of the material that they have assembled. So having introduced this in that way, I want to continue with the eminent people on this panel, starting with J.J. Hertog to my far right. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Hertog.
My great pleasure to be here with you, Mark.
Yes, and Bob Wagoner is the Internet Skeptic. Thank you for joining me, Bob, and I really enjoyed your presentation yesterday. Mitchell Rabin with A Better World. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely.
And finally, Desiree Hertog, who is an environmental specialist.
Thank you. I'm probably the skeptic of the skeptic table here. So.
Right. But so one thing I want to say is that three of you are at a disadvantage because you really did not see Bob's presentation on the material of global warming. So when you say you want to correct him, because I heard that on the other time, I'm sensitive to language. So my biggest concern is that we have freedom of thought and expression, and that nobody is intimidated from taking from investigating things, because I feel what happened in 1932 and what was building up, it wasn't that the Nazis were trying to get rid of Jews, it was something that slowly crept up, and they were looking to this country for guidance in eugenics. It started particularly in California, where even with less court due process, people were lobotomized, people were sterilized. They were going about it even more carefully than we were in Germany. So what happened is it starts to escalate, and pretty soon you have a bureaucrat who decides that he wants somebody's house, and he says, "Oh, you're a misfit," and then that person is cast away. It wasn't they were concerned about defective genes; they wanted their property. Or else somebody's in a university. They're a powerful person, and they're stopping, you know, the Third Reich or the party. And again, it wasn't that they were Jewish or undesirable or unintelligent, because it starts with measuring IQ. It's you know, and so I think
It's economic, you're saying.
it can be economic. It can
motives.
also be to protect yourself, because when I was in Jammu Kashmir giving a lecture at the journalist department, I talked to some of the professors, and they weren't particularly at all extreme religious people. They said they had no idea how overnight, all of a sudden, this fanatical type that were not that respected intellectually, all of a sudden took over. And anyone who was dissenting didn't have a voice.
Well, that's the danger of this global warming theory. It's the politicization of science. And what you did is you just gave an example of when that happened in the past. Once you get a politicization of science, one, you're going to destroy the credibility. I would say that already science has had its credibility shaken with the cooling world. Now we're doing it on the other end with the global warming. So when I see everybody jumping on this bandwagon, and the way that I see the politicization of the science, I think that's a big, big concern, just because we've seen what it's done in the past. And if you haven't read it yet, there's a book called State of Fear out by Michael Crichton, and he addresses that very issue. And that's the big point he makes at the very end, is what you really have to watch for, is the way that this thing is going, is you're politicizing science. And as I mentioned last night in the event, people are, you know, the environmentalists show up and they promote this population control argument. And I just pointed out to them that, sure, I mean, this may even sound great the way that you're proposing it now, but remember, Bismarck was replaced by Hitler. Lenin was replaced by Stalin. So even if you get these ideas passed with a favorable politician in your favor, you got to worry about who's going to follow that person and the damage that they can do. And you've seen what's happened in the past with the politicization of science.
I studied with out of Franza at Princeton University, who was a Bismarckian specialist. And there's an ideological basis, if we could use this as an example, between the 19th century and the early 20th century rise of fascism, which I would call is even more important than politics. That's the ideological substructure, which is in social Darwinism. In this country, Margaret Sanger and the others who laid, as it were, a more basic network or foundation for the social sciences, the political sciences, and the economic sciences to merge into an authoritarian mentality that would allow for the realization of humanity on such a wide scale. So it's more than just the political factors.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for
well,
this
obviously it was a horrendous thing in terms of
Right.
the depopulation of, we would say, something on the order of 60 million people, if one is to add up all of the groups and subgroups that were victims of World War II in that period of tragedy of the nemesis.
But we today have large populations that are suffering terribly, and when the scientists don't have the freedom to express or to study, you know, for the funding, like it comes up about the oil companies, I could tell, and I admire how quick you are on your feet, because having not been at the presentation yesterday, you're sort of trying to feel him out to see where he's coming from. And often if a person is against global warming hysteria, they say that they're for the oil companies, you know, and so
Sure.
you sort of ferreted that out, but you know.
But I'm actually not confused about that, and I was saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, you know, almost playfully. But I am making a sociological point, which is that if you do go to that side of the conversation, you find yourself in bed with some rather strange bedfellows. That's all. And it's just something to be mindful of.
What do you say on that? What do you say on that?
That's not my final point on it, but if you want to comment, absolutely do. I mean, I see, actually, if I may say, to come full circle is, when I started learning about the sovereignty movement in the early 90s, and I started to look at the libertarian perspective on politics and the government, I found, as a former, actually not even former hippie, who used to demonstrate against the war in Vietnam many years ago, that my bedfellows were people that were actually connected to things like the Spotlight, very interesting, very libertarian style, what could be considered right-wing publication, and even the John Birch Society, even though I'm not a racist or anything of that sort. But
Right.
these were the kinds of people that I was kind of cavorting with, because they also embraced this idea of small government and a libertarian perspective.
Right.
You know, I'm saying all of this a bit tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
That doesn't make me a John Bircher. That doesn't make Robert an oil, investor in Exxon or hired as a consultant.
But
I
don't
don't
you,
believe that.
but don't you think when truth starts to emerge, all of the different factions come together, because
Yes,
things just
I
are
do.
what they are.
I do,
And
yeah.
and that's why, for my sake, I just really wanted to know what is really happening with the climate. What is this a concern? Because if scientists are not getting funding to study things that should be studied, like, you know, you have this chart saying that very little is known about the sun, very little is known about water vapor. So if sun and water vapor are important aspects, shouldn't they be funded? Shouldn't a scientist have a chance?
Well, this is
Sure.
you're raising a very important subject, which was discussed in a film that was, since your show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, which is subsequent to, consequent to What the Bleep Do We Know. The antecedent to that, really, in some ways, was Mind Walk. And if you remember, in that film, Liv Ullmann was a scientist, and she backed out of being a scientist because the economics, the financing for her science was all done by the pharmaceutical industry through her university, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was Harvard. She could not do real scientific research because they wanted a specified outcome.
Okay, so
this is a
again,
serious problem
what Bob
for all
said.
scientists.
What Bob
Funding is
said
incredible,
after the presentation in Dayton, when he's talking about 0-point energy, because John Cheshire had not Russell Targ, but who's Russell Targ's partner?
I'll put off.
Hal Puthoff had come down to Panama City, and this was pretty much the first time you were introduced to the concept of 0-point energy. But what Bob said was his concern about global warming was a concern for science.
Yeah.
Sure.
That,
it's,
science would not be disrespected.
Sure, so it's going to shake the credibility of science, because if this is exposed, and I believe that as more people look into it like I have done, what I started to find was serious flaws, and yet everyone's getting on the bandwagon. And when I saw that, I said, there's got to be sciences that understand the statistics, that understand multivariable modeling. They're going to look at this and they're going to reach the same conclusion I have. And you're starting to see it. You saw the show, The Great Global Warming Swindle. We've had this presentation out.
You can't assume everybody's seen that.
Well, I mean,
have you seen it? Have you seen it? The great.
But my point is, people, when they What I found interesting was we did the presentation, as you've seen on the internet. We did this well over a year ago, and we keyed on certain serious flaws. If you watch the Great Global Warming Swindle produced by the BBC, they reached the exact same conclusion. So my point is that I believe that as more people start looking at it like we're doing here and that I've done,
more objectively,
and realize how critical it is, because we're talking about genocide.
Yeah, because I don't have a vested interest in it. I don't have a dog in this fight.
Right.
I just wanted to look at it and see what's going on here, and I started to see some serious flaws. I think that as more people that don't have a vested interest look at this, they're going to reach the same conclusion I have, and then people are going to start asking, now wait a minute. We have record after record after record of these universities supporting this, and now it's just going to be like global cooling all over again. People are going to look at them and saying, these people can't be trusted. It's going to destroy the credibility of science.
You're going to have rats off a ship. But,
sure.
But now there's two things. John Cheshire says you've got to get big names behind you.
Sure.
And then when he saw the Great Global Warming Swindle, he saw those big names.
Sure.
Another thing I want to tell my viewers is that the Internet Skeptic here always invites the researchers that Al Gore relies on. You, right?
Sure.
You invite. Tell me who they are.
When we give this presentation around Columbus, Ohio, a great deal, and whenever we give this event, we invite people from the Bird Polar Research Center, and we've had them show up to ask questions. And so I'm not trying to mislead anybody. I'm trying to get to the truth like everybody else. But we literally, deliberately invite the experts on the subject to come and challenge the questions. Unfortunately, they're not here. It'd be nice to film them, but you can see that they
have nothing to gain by debating. That's sure. What the problem is. And JJ, it's such an honor to have you at this table when you share the experience of who you studied with. And for scientists, you know, to go into how does a society go so amiss?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity really to share all perspectives of what we feel to be the need for more education in the world, and the realization that Desiree and I share with model building that can be looked at from all vantage points, because there's nothing to be gained if this is just a closed conversation. We have to be able to push the envelope of energy and information at the same time, look at ourselves as requiring within each of our background, no matter how many degrees we have, the recognition that still there's this vast opportunity to learn more and to apply on a pluralistic level to all societies and all members of the human predicament, that we are, in our opinion, running out of non-renewable resources as they are presently understood. We are having to look at energy alternatives very critically, and we have to come up with better models of testing, because we do not buy into the dualistic situation of classical paradigms of science, nor do we accept the fact that the humans are the only culprits.
Do you think we're overpopulated? Do you think that the Earth can't support more people? Because the Trojan War was justified by